He found a lit torch after going down a slight incline. He saw another light down another path, and he got the distinct impression he was being led. Maybe this was the place he was meant to find. There were too many signs of life and clues for this to be a random encounter. "Hello?" Matthew called out again. This time he thought he heard the muffled cries of voices, but it was overshadowed by the constant sound of running water. He came across a bigger passage that opened up, and the sound of running water splashing off a rock was prevalent. He saw a man in black robes sitting on a boulder. He had a half-empty bucket next to a mostly full bucket of vegetables. He used the dim torchlight to aid his task of dicing vegetables, then putting them into the empty bucket. The man looked as if he could be 40 or 50. He was pale, and he hadn't seen daylight in a while. With a small knife, he diced a carrot, letting the pieces fall into the bucket. Matthew noticed his black robes were more like bathrobes than monk. "Hi," said Matthew to the stranger. "Did Dan send you?" said the pale man. Matthew thought, as if he didn't suspect the question. "Yeah, he sent me. Are you the wise man?" "So that's what he's calling me these days. Prick." He whispered the insult at a lower octave. "What do you want to know?" Matthew paused and said, I thought you were supposed to tell me." The pale man smiled and pulled an onion from the full bucket and did a casual rinse of the dirt in the trickling stream water that sprayed from the walls. "All right, come with me then," said the pale man. Matthew followed the man in the mountain wearing the bathrobes towards the sound of human misery. "I'm Matthew. What's your name?" he asked. The pale man held 2 buckets in one hand and half turned. "Loki," he said. They reached their destination. Matthew could hear the sounds of humans crying out, and now he found the source. It was a pitfall into a water catch, with walls too sheer to climb and too high to jump out of. People floating in a human fish tank. It was 10 to 12 people of different genders and ethnicities eternally treading water. They cried out when they saw Loki and Matthew look over the side, either violent curses or pleas of help. "What's with this?" Matthew cried out. Loki smirked. "Where you now live." With a supernatural speed, Loki's hand went out to push Matthew in, but something happened in that fraction of a second that surprised Matthew just as much as Loki. Matthew saw the hand moving quicker than a serpent strike and turned his body to evade. Loki threw 3 more strikes just as fast as the first, but didn't manage to touch him. Matthew stepped aside, increasing his chance to be tipped into the fish tank to 0. Loki put his bucket down as if this matter warranted his full and undivided attention. "So it wasn't bullshit," Loki said, though Matthew had no context to what he meant. "You really do represent the end of things." Loki tossed 3 knives at him in rapid succession, then charged at him before he had time to react. Matthew saw everything coming at him in slow motion, though he still felt the limit of how fast his body could react. He moved out of the path of all 3 blades in a dynamic shimmy, but felt Loki's hands close around his shoulders. He knew they were coming, but his body literally did not have the physical speed to step free. When the hands clamped down, he cried out. It was like vice grips crushing down on his clavicle. Loki pulled him in close to bite at his neck, but he used the little wiggle room he had to avoid what would have torn his throat out. He hit Loki with a knee to the groin, and it had the exact same effect as doing absolutely nothing. In an act of pure desperation, Matthew fell down, hoping that the sudden jolt would reposition him into moving his hand, but it didn't. He saw Loki come in to bite him again, and this time he kicked off with both feet and pushed him into the fish tank prison. Loki tried to move his hands and let Matthew drop, but this time Loki moved too slow, and Matthew grabbed both his wrists and drug him down with him. He splashed into the water, and Loki reclaimed his grip and pulled Matthew down. He felt himself slipping away until he saw the many hands of the human fish dragging Loki down. Matthew wasted no time, yanked the blade free, and stabbed him as swiftly as his hand could move. The other captives caught on to Matthew's motive and followed suit until there was a bloody mess in the water. It took several hours for Matthew to use Loki's knives and create handholds in the sheer wall great enough to pull himself up. But when he did, he spoke to each of Loki's captives. Kept them for weeks, months in some cases, and they insisted Loki drink their blood periodically. He didn't linger long here and had no interest in explaining any of this to the local authorities, so he left the moment everyone was out. What troubled Matthew the most was why Dan sent him there at all. Did he say something? Or do something wrong? Or was it something else entirely? When he got back to the Great Hall and questioned Dan, he told him that Loki was graduation, and Matthew accepted that as true, despite the nagging suspicion it was more to it than that. Alliyah knuckled up. She tried very hard to suppress her very real fear of heights. The way the helo rocked and swayed made that an impossible feat. The copter took a picturesque flight path through the snow-capped Colorado Rockies. She sat next to 5 other men and women who were dressed to the teeth in tactical gear just like her, all white to mirror the blankets of snow. Each had rifles and loadouts that she was just now understanding the full meaning of. As much as she trained, her focus was more centered around cultivation of her powers for tactical use on the field than it was with firearms. So while she had a grasp of the weapons, they were by no means a part of her. One of the agents leaned over his rifle, which was secured between his legs like a crutch. "This your first op?" he said loudly over the persistent grinding of the helicopter blades. "Yeah," Alliyah said nervously. "Heard you were a superhero, some such bullshit." Alliyah laughed, and it completely took her mind off the sickening fear she had of falling, if only for a few moments. "So what's your call sign? Wolverine, Storm, or something like that?" he went on to say, taking her amusement as a green light to go further. "No call sign, just Agent Grace," she said, realizing she had never addressed herself as Agent Grace before. "Don't worry, I'll think of something," he said with confidence. "I'm Agent Daniel, who's been on the job for about 6 years or so. Came out with the Marines as a tech sergeant. I do the communications or anything that has to do with tech." "Don't mind Daniels, he's our resident comedian," said the biggest man out of the 5. "Thanks, Cormac, I always knew you thought I was a joke," he said with a conviction to warrant his comedy. "What's your designation on the team?" Alliyah asked. "I'm Demolitions, but I suppose you're Demolitions now." Alliyah glanced casually at Agent Darton's hard stare to get some indication as to if that was in fact her designation in this team. "She's Special Unit. Besides, don't get too attached to your girlfriend, Daniel. She's on loan." Alliyah awkwardly raised her hand. Agent Darton rolled her eyes almost audibly. "What is it, Agent Grace? I still don't know exactly what it is we came to do or why I'm here." Agent Darton seemed to go through different emotions, silently deciding how or if she was going to tell her what her function was. Though the 10 eyes staring at her told her, Agent Grace wasn't the only one that wanted to know. Even Alejandro tipped his Vogue magazine to see if the subject presented itself. We're up against a violent band of Norse neo-Nazis turned humanolutionists that believe that the Bubble Eyes have compromised the government, so they declare their territory sovereign land. "So we're what, bringing them in because they're not paying their taxes?" Daniel said. "That, and everyone who came to do so has died horribly. They've sent other federal agents back minus their major organs." The room went quiet again, aside from the loud whirring of the helo's blades. "My mother told me one day I will die.